Have you ever felt trapped in a relationship that drains your soul, leaving you questioning your own sanity? Welcome to Narcissistic Abuse with Vanessa Reiser, the podcast that shines a light on the dark tactics of abusers and empowers survivors to reclaim their lives. I'm Vanessa Reiser, licensed therapist, author, advocate, and fellow warrior on the path to healing from narcissistic and cult abuse. Joining me for many upcoming episodes is my co-host Dave. We'll unpack each conversation together, diving deeper into narcissistic abuse, cult dynamics, politics, pop culture, and what it all means for real life healing. Today, we'll hear harrowing stories from survivors, explore the psychology behind these toxic relationships, and share insights and tools to spot red flags, break free, and begin profound healing. This show is for mature audiences and may include upsetting topics like violence. For full content warnings, sources, and resources, check the episode notes. Guest opinions are their own and don't necessarily reflect mine or any affiliated platforms. This podcast is not a substitute for therapy, legal, or medical advice. Today, I'm truly excited to bring you one of the clearest, most compassionate voices in the world of attachment theory and trauma. She's a licensed therapist, creator of The Attachment Nerd, and someone whose work has helped thousands of people understand why they keep finding themselves in toxic dynamics and how to finally break those painful patterns. Oh, Eli, thank you so much for being with me today. It's such a great experience to be with you. I'm so excited about the work you're doing. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be with you too. It's always such a breath of fresh air for me when I know I'm talking with someone who has a lived experience of an abusive relationship, because it's like, okay, so now I'm not having to like try and explain, this in an underworld of dynamics, because you already get that piece. So like we can kind of like, okay, we get that part, you know what that's like, and then we can talk about all of the other stuff around it. So I'm so thankful for all of the work you've done to be public and honest and to help other people in that same situation.
Thank you so much. I mean, it is so nice to be engaging with others in this space that do get it. It's extremely difficult to describe to others that which you can barely process yourself. So
Right.
it's incredibly valuable for clinicians and life coaches and psychologists and uh,
Mhm.
doctors, even clergy, anybody who has that kind of platform to validate people who go through this is it's so powerful. And I
Mhm.
mean, I remember at one point my son was telling me like, because I was having to deal with post-separation abuse. He was like, "Can't you just stop?" I'm like, "I can't. People need me. I have to do this. It feels like an obligation."
Mm.
Um, but how did you get into this? Tell me and the listeners, how did you first start in this space?
Well, I grew up in a home where my parents both came from yucky hard stuff, and they weren't able to like heal or deal with their baggage before becoming parents. So my early childhood was really insecure. My parents were not abusive. Their parents were abusive. So they were breaking the cycle by not engaging that same level of like rage and control. But neither one of them was really emotionally healthy or stable when I was a kid. So, like most therapists, I came into this work honestly. I came into this work by needing it. So it was, through my own therapy and my own process as a young adult, kind of looking back on my childhood and being like, oh, yeah, that was not good. And here's how it affected me, that it was very natural for me to want to know more and want to dig into the research and want to become a therapist myself. And so here we are almost 19 years later, which is just wild. Yeah.
Yeah. And I know you're can you tell the listeners like what your focus is, what you're working on now, some things that are
Mhm.
really
Mhm.
important to you?
I mean, my primary focus is, how do I help parents give kids the secure attachment and experience in their lives that they didn't have when they were growing up. And that doesn't mean, how do I give my kid a perfect childhood? Ain't nobody in control of that. And certainly, if you've had narcissistic abuse and you're co parenting with that person, you can't give your childhood, or you can't give your child a childhood that is free of mess. But what the research says that's so hopeful to me is that if a child has even one caregiver in their life who has the skill set to be a secure attachment figure, the resilient rates just skyrocket, right? Like a child learns resilience from knowing there is someone who knows how to be there for them. So
You
I
know,
want to help every parent who can learn that, learn that.
yeah, people ask me this all the time. There's a lot of books on attachment styles.
Mhm.
And I even put it in my book. And truth be told, I have a very surface understanding. I have a
Mm.
curiosity about it. I know that my attachment style is anxious secure, which is actually not tragic because there is a secure component. Don't know where it came from. But I think that it is really important for people to understand what attachment is, where it comes from, what their own attachment styles are. I know there's a zillion different assessments you can take online and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Um, but I think it really the goal is to be secure, be surrounded by people who are securely attached. What does that all mean? Can you tell us a little bit about attachment style?
Well, yeah. Okay. So I have obsessed about this for a very, very long time. And this is what my research training is in as well. And so it's hard to sum it up. It's like asking like a neuroscientist being like, tell us about the brain.
Right.
Like, okay, where do we start? But the important piece, I think, especially for parents, is know this. Human beings are wired to get regulation and support from other human beings. And when kids experience a relationship with a caregiver who is warm, who is responsive to tender needs and to stress in general, so the child is in a place of stress or distress, the parent responds and cares. So the warmth and responsiveness, who is generally stable in their sense of self. It's like we all have moods. We all get insecure from time to time. Like life is vulnerable. And obviously, if you're in the midst of an abuse situation, your sense of self is very disrupted. But if a child can sense that over time, that the general experience they have of you is that you are sturdy and soft, you are connected and you are reliable, then that experience will help that child learn a healthy pattern of attaching, which means they will feel uncomfortable if someone is dismissive or hurtful to them. It will feel wrong and weird, right? Instead of normal, like, well, that's how my family treated me. It makes sense that this person's treating me this way, right? They will learn to reach for others when they need them and receive that care. So it's learning how to say, I need your help and letting the help in. You don't really need to know your attachment style. So this is also gets complicated. There are two different bodies of research. So this is only for the nerds. There's research from one tradition, the developmental psychology tradition. There's research from the social psychology tradition, and they don't correlate. And so there's a very weird kind of thing there. Like you could get on the internet and you're like, oh, I'm this type and this style, and you listen to me talking about attachment, and you're like, those are different words and names, and it's because there's different research. So the research I'm most interested in, that I think is the most reliable, is really looking at a relationship. What's the nature of this relationship? How secure is it? How much can this child rely on this parent to show up for them and regulate them? So the most important thing is that we all are focusing on what does a secure attachment look like? How do I become emotionally secure enough in my own coping that my children will want to come to me when they need me? That's the
Yeah, that's
goal.
really important. Yeah. So how do people that have experienced trauma, let's say, how do they
Mhm.
develop a more secure style?
Okay, well, two things. One, you can have a secure attachment pattern with your caregivers in childhood and end up in an abusive relationship later on because the abuse isn't happening because of some trauma you have. The abuse is happening because of the disease in the abuser, right? The way that the abuser thinks about others. That's from their trauma, but it's not because you are vulnerable or something like that. It's from them. So if you've been secure or you've never experienced secure attachment and you go through a traumatic relationship, because an abusive dynamic is an attachment trauma. So the instinct is I'm going to bond with this person and we're going to take care of each other. And instead, I bond with this person and they terrorize me. And so that's an attachment trauma. So when you go through an attachment trauma like that, the work is grief work. It's being able to be sad that someone who should have been safe and kind was instead scary and humiliating, right? There is empowerment work, remembering that you have a voice, that you can stand up for yourself. I kind of want to tell a story. Can I tell a story?
Of course.
So I was in an abusive relationship in graduate school. And the person I was in a relationship with is very, very, very gifted in manipulation, as are most abusers. Is very articulate. And I got out of that relationship, thank goodness, and ran as fast as I could. And recently he popped up in my orbit because he writes books to help men with their sexual issues.
Of course he does.
Sorry. That's really mature of me, but honestly, I feel like in my story I get to be that way towards him. And I was on this I've been on other people's podcasts in different places, and he popped up again. And this is 20 years ago, y'all. Maybe more than that. And I feel afraid of him. I still know what he's capable of, even though I got away. And I did some therapy work. I'm always like, back to therapy. My mom calls it your rent-a-friend. Back to my rent-a-friend. Time to do some work on myself. And in that session, what was really clear was how much I still could grow in empowering myself and being like, "Oh, I can actually just do what I want to do and ask what I wanna ask from people who are interacting with him, who are my people, who didn't know about him or who he is in my life." And I can say, "Hey, this doesn't feel good, and here's why." Like, that's crazy. I can do that. So you're grieving what happened to you. You're working through the empowerment. And I think that's for honestly years to come is being able to go, wait, I can take care of myself and do what feels right for me. And then re-engaging a different way of finding your people. Like, who are my people? How do I find them? And surrounding yourself with people who show up for you and are safe.
Yeah, I think you bring up something really interesting, which is the grief process. I
Mm.
think for so many of my clients is dynamic because they are, oftentimes having to carry the load of a household or,
Mhm.
manage parenting or, sort of like keep your
Yes.
chin up and, keep going and I really resonate with that as somebody who was like the hero child in my,
Mm.
growing up. It's like I keep it together. There's a matriarchal component
Mm.
to who I am in my fibers
Mm.
and like to allow myself to like weep or like
Mm.
imagine because really when you're going through narcissistic abuse or any cult dynamic, there's like not just the grief of the relationship, but there's this grieving of humanity. There's this overarching
Yes.
macro systemic thing of like, wait, people are fucking evil? Like, this is so scary. And
Yes.
so I think there's this dynamic grief. It's not just the grieving of the white picket fence or whatever, in your mind's eye you were imagining was going to be. It's this like it's this really heavy grief of like, oh my God, like there are bad people all around me. And, managing that reality it can be very burdensome. And then as I mentioned, like I think a lot of us are just so busy trying to keep things together. We don't let ourselves experience that, which we really do deserve to have.
Yes. Well, and need to have our bodies need
Yeah.
us to release grief. That's a completing the stress
Yeah.
cycle, right? If you don't actually get it out, it stays in and it curdles. This is so profound. And now you've got me thinking about something else too, which is that grief that we face when we realize that people can be intentionally violent. I think it's one of the number one reasons people have such a hard time advocating and believing survivors because they don't want that grief. They would much rather believe it takes 2 to tango. Well, what did you do that made him do that? Or what how come you didn't leave? Or, like, it's much scarier to be like, "Uh, that's not how this works."
Yeah. It is
Wow,
scary.
yeah,
It's
it
scary.
is.
And I think you're seeing it like in a political climates in terms of like the Epstein files where it's not a blue or red issue anymore. It feels like there's this nexus of scariness that
Mhm.
is just um it's wild to imagine how far reaching and like, how powerful people can behave when they're unchecked, this kind of stuff. So I
Oh,
think
yeah.
the good news about that kind of stuff, if even if I can say that, is that I think it is opening up a dialogue for people to
Mm,
understand that. And maybe what we're experiencing is this collective trauma. And at some point, maybe we will ultimately collectively grieve
mm,
these things that we thought were systemic and safe or whatever, and then hopefully begin to, to collaborate again, because we're so polarized and it's super scary. But I think I really
mm,
have to keep that with me as I'm treating my clients, because they often come to me and the house is on fire and they're like,
mhm.
and I don't know that I'm allowing them that, let it out kind of thing.
Mm. Well, it's hard because you can't grieve in the middle of a house fire because you're not safe, right? So it's
Right.
like step 1, get out of the fire,
Right.
right? And what I think is also really complicated is that in my situation, I didn't have children with my abuser. I didn't marry my abuser. I wasn't living with my abuser. So like I was able to get out in a way that I was still in grad school with him, so there was still some proximity I couldn't avoid until I graduated, until I moved. But there was a sense of like I can get away from him. For many, 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 and I think most survivors, the abuser remains somehow in our lives. And so, me dealing with my abuser in this, like, him in his book sphere is an example of that. That's very slight compared to I'm co-parenting with this person, right? Or, this person is actually the pastor at my church. I don't want to leave my community. And so I'm dealing with this. Like, it's so messy when you have to grieve ongoing, right? So, like, there's the initial grief of, like, I'm in an abusive relationship. And then there's the grief of all the things this person did to my life, to my kids, to my sense of self. And then there's like that disturbing moment you realize, and they're still doing it and they're going to keep doing it. And I can be in a very different place because I'm no longer, involved with them in the same way I was before. And I'm removing some access to me. But you're still having new injuries. There are new forms of abuse. Hold on, that was my son.
I
One
can't hear
second.
anything. Don't worry about it.
Okay. Hey, Gator, I'm on a podcast, so hang out downstairs and then when I'm done, we'll hang, okay? That's okay, love.
So I think, this grieving component it can be really heavy. I know, like, when I went through my abusive relationship, similar to you, I was not married. I did not co-parent. I felt very fortunate. I did live with him, but I was able to get out of there. And what happened subsequently was I was getting flooded with litigiousness. So now I found myself in the court battles for, believe it or not, 6 years or close to
Oh
six
my
years.
gosh.
And it was for a relationship that was what, a year and a half. So I spent more time in court. I mean,
Wow.
but I didn't have like that time
Mm,
um to kind of, so a lot of that for a lot of the people listening and a lot of my clients, they are treading water and
mhm.
they can't, they're trying to keep their nose to get air. So it's impossible for them to grieve it until they get out of it, which sometimes, quite honestly, when the child, is of age, which we're talking about, 18 years,
Yeah.
um, things like that. And so they're not able to get their land legs and like find,
Yes.
put one foot in front of the other, let alone grief. So there's just
Yes.
this like, I want to say, like, it's funny because you have this cat, but like when the mommy cat picks up the baby cat by the neck and
Yes.
the little
Yes.
baby cat's just frozen. It reminds me of that. Or it reminds me like you're frozen, you're stuck. Or it
Yeah.
reminds me of when you play Candyland and you land on that black thing and you're like, and you're stuck. Like they're just fucking stuck. There's nothing
Yes.
that can
Yes.
kind of help them. And they're so triggered by this idea that we're going to have to put one foot in front of the other. Like, fuck you. I'm stuck. Like
Mhm.
it's not of my doing. So, this idea, of grieving, it feels like I wish I could, Vanessa, this kind of stuff. But, there's also that, right? So even like when I'm
Well,
talking about it's hard to do that.
I think that's one of the fundamental ways that manipulative narcissistic people damage somebody's sense of self, though, is they convince you you're powerless. They're convincing you of that so you'll feel powerless in response to them and what they want, how they're going to use and manipulate you. But the side effect is that you still feel powerless even after you leave them.
Mhm.
And so there is a process, I think, that has to happen there. You're so right. Before you can grieve, at some point, you have to be able to go, I am in here still. I am still here and I am still capable and I still have agency, even though for a very long time I've been convinced by someone that I don't, and or that it's dangerous to have agency. It's dangerous to make choices, to put my feet in front of the other. It's like you've been extinguished from the instinct to move in any direction, because the second you move, you get punished. No matter which way you go. You go left, you're in trouble. You go right, you're in trouble. So now you're trying to heal and your brain says there is nowhere you can go that is safe. But that is the message of the abuser. And that other thing I would say is, what you have to do is have to start purging your head, heart, soul, and body of their voice, and remembering or learning to hear for the first time your voice.
Yeah. I think most of my clients vacillate between the folly or the intimidating, like the joke of it all, and then the
Mm,
severe terror. They're kind of, and it feels very much
mm,
like how I vacillate with the political climate now. It's like, oh, he's an idiot, he's a clown, or are we all going to die? You kind of, I feel like it's very akin, this kind of
that's so
feeling of like,
interesting.
yeah, it's like this is a joke and this guy's just posturing, or, and quite
Mhm.
honestly, they're both accurate and they're
Yeah.
both compelling. And so I can't say to, the client who's co-parenting with a narcissist, step into your agency, because it really has to be almost in different ways that they have to find that. It can't
Yeah.
be, just, okay, yeah, I'm going to do this thing. I mean, they
Yeah.
get walloped by these abusers in the court system and stuff like that. So I guess the best way to do it would be for them to find ways that they can have agency
Mhm.
in certain aspects of their lives. Does that seem fair?
Yes. Yes. Okay. So Viktor Frankl, I don't know if you've ever read his book, Man's Search for Meaning, but he was a Holocaust survivor and he survived 4 concentration camps, lost his children, lost his wife, lost everything. But he was a psychiatrist. And what he did while he was in the camp to survive was he studied how people were handling the situation psychologically. And he was looking at when the people who were the most resilient, so to speak, in that situation were the ones who weren't waiting to be rescued, but who were trying to figure out how they could cope in the situation they were in. And I think that's very different than like, hey, I'm not going to try to get out. Like, but if you're in a situation you cannot leave, like the courts have screwed you, you are co-parenting with this crazy narcissistic person, and you've done everything. You've gotten the lawyers, you've done everything you can, and this is your situation. What what can I do to stand up for myself is no longer maybe the question, because you've done that. You've stood up for yourself and it didn't work because of forces outside of your control. The question I think becomes instead, who do I want to be in response to a situation I don't have control over? And how can I, quote unquote, rebel against this system and this person and their desire to keep me silent and to keep me submissive? How can I rebel against that in a way that keeps me intact still while I'm here? And so sometimes I'll do the same thing with my clients when they're dealing with a narcissist that they cannot get rid of for whatever reason. It's like, how can you pretend to submit so that then you can fly under the radar in your rebellion?
Yeah. I think, it would have to be very subjective and it would be very sort of situational for people to figure out what do they have control over? How can
Mhm.
they properly, compartmentalize this part of this
Yes.
miserable experience and then kind of focus their energies on the rest of the pie. So if this is
Yeah.
depending if it's 25% of your life is this, master manipulator's sycophant is just constantly torturing you in the judicial system, what parts of it can you spend your energies on outside of that? That can be a full-time job, though I have to honor people
Mhm.
listening like that. For me, at that time, because I was writing a book, I had my regular full-time job, I had the writing of the book full-time job, and I had babysitting this fool's, hissy fits as a
Mhm.
full-time fucking job.
Mhm.
So I had three
Amen.
full-time jobs. And so it isn't that it's going to be a tiny piece of the pie. And I think people would resent that. It is a big part of your
Yeah.
life, but I think you still do have to, because if you are stuck there, you have to
Mhm.
radically accept that reality, and then develop coping mechanisms, and also identify things that you can kind of focus on that bring you joy, stuff
Mhm.
like this ultimately, because it is
Mhm.
so all consuming, and it you end up being re-traumatized almost on a daily basis, all day, every day.
Mhm.
So, it can feel like there's no way out. It can absolutely feel that way.
Well, I mean, I think about human beings in situations like, the Palestinians in Gaza or, like the folks who've been in the US recently detained, put in immigration detainment centers. Like, what a nightmare we can all be put into in different levels and different ways based on our privilege, based on our access, all that stuff. But being in an abusive relationship, the people in the Dilley Detention Center are in an abusive relationship with
Mhm.
ICE, right? You, in your experience of being with this fool, I like you listening to you calling him a fool, being with this fool, that's an abusive relationship. And within that abusive relationship, the question is there a way for me to leave? Oh, great. That is the best option if we can get you out safely. Is there a way for me to leave safely? What if there's not? Then what? Well, then I don't get to claim my freedom outside of this relationship, but how can I claim my freedom somehow within it? And, that can be what the things are that you tell yourself inside your head. That can be the little ways you treat your body with kindness and respect that are rebellions against how that person treats you or treated you. I think sometimes we get too macro on this stuff. It's like get micro. Is it going to make it okay? No. Is it going to make it all tenable and no, it's not. It's going to suck. You're in a really awful situation.
Yeah.
And there are little things they cannot take from you no matter how hard they try.
Yeah, that's
Don't let them.
important. Yeah, that's important. If there's little like glimpses of joy, like there's things in
Mhm.
nature that you can find or you can try
Mm.
to get away, um, and pepper those throughout your day. But it can be really challenging. I think one of the things, towards the conversation of radical acceptance that I learned from my therapist was I was being stalked and I was being
Oh.
like having to deal with like very sort of dysregulated around like going on my runs. I would run with like a GoPro and I just had these thoughts that I was going to be murdered, and
Oh.
it was pretty scary. So I remember talking to my therapist about this and she was like, do you remember when those kids got killed in Sandy Hook, Connecticut, and the person went into this classroom and shot up these kindergartners and everything? And then, it was a trauma for all of those parents that lost their precious children in this slaughter. And then, Alex Jones went and started running his mouth about how it was not real. And so he sort of, he cultivates this groupthink cultic thing where all of these whack jobs now start messaging these parents and they're like, you're a liar. Da, da, da. And I thought, oh my God, like I could have never in my mind managed the reality of the loss of my kindergartner, my precious, 5-year-old, and then have somebody show me the injustice of that. So when I think about that, I think that is like, it really, believe it or not, it settles my nervous system because I'm just like, if they can endure that, I can endure anything.
Mm.
'Cause I
Mm.
can't, this is something I cannot fathom. The
Mhm.
rage that I would feel, the
Mhm.
injustice that I would feel would be absolutely all encompassing, would be,
Yes.
I would not be able to process that people would behave this way. I just wouldn't be able to do it. It would just have me spinning, for what
Yes.
I would be heavily medicated or, suicide. I don't know. But the idea that that would be a thing that we all witnessed because he ended up getting sued and da da da, and
Mhm.
it really does. Radical acceptance has, it's very much the sister of silver linings, because if you can think about like also like alternatively how things could be worse or something like this, like you
Mhm.
can better, I think, accept some things. And I had to accept that I was being stalked, and I was trained on how to just imagine that every single time I left my house that somebody was recording me, and I had to learn how to
Mm.
live with somebody just watching me all the time. It's almost like you have to get callous, like someone's poking you all day. like
Well,
someone.
what if we call it adaptation? Because I think what you did was you adapted to a new environment. So the old environment is no one is stalking you. The new environment is someone is stalking you.
Yes.
And you were able to adapt to it. And I don't think that means that you were I think where we get really lost in this conversation is the word acceptance sounds
Right.
like
You're making permission.
permission.
Yes.
Yes. And that isn't what we mean by this word. So we almost need like another word to
You're
use in
right.
this.
You're right.
And I think especially when people have come from narcissistic abuse and they finally have gotten to the point where they were able to see clearly enough to say no more, it's like I don't want to ever accept again because that person trained me to accept their abuse.
I love this. Radically adapt.
Radically adapt. My light just went out. I didn't have it plugged in. Hold
You're
on.
fine.
Damn
It
it.
could still see you just fine.
Do you want me to just leave it?
Yeah, leave it. You're
Okay, okay,
fine.
okay. Okay.
Radically adapt. I think the light went out because it was just such a brilliant concept. What do you think about that? I think that's pretty profound, actually. Radically adapt.
I think that's right. I think that's what we should start talking about with women. It's not radical acceptance that this person is a monster and keeps hurting you and harming you. It's radical adaptation that you continue to find ways to exist and rebel and thrive and survive despite the fact that you have no control over someone else's behavior.
Yeah, that's really profound. I like that much better than accept. And I feel much more confident when I talk to my clients, using a term like this, because it feels like that's what I did in those moments. I was being
Mm,
taught by my therapist to make, certain concessions when I got into my car and to sort of scan
mhm,
the area and pay attention to things or
mm,
bring, pepper spray, or I was having to adapt is what I was doing.
mhm,
I mean,
mhm.
accepting that he was going to be stalking me for years was very hard to imagine because you're right. There's this connotation that like I'm allowing it, or this injustice is something that I just have to participate in some way.
Yes.
But yeah, that is not okay. It's super. I like this much better. So thank you for that. It's a gift.
Yeah, that was so fun. We did that together.
Yeah. It's so true, don't you think?
Oh, I do think it's true. And I think that's what oh my gosh, my brain just farted. Victor or I mean, I was gonna say Yalom, it's not Yalom, Viktor Frankl. That's what Viktor Frankl was talking about in his work. Like, he was talking about the ability to be in a horrific situation and radically adapt, as opposed to constantly looking for I think it's really normal to hear a survivor say, like, "I just can't wait for this person to be gone. I just
Yeah.
want them to be gone. Then I'll be okay. Then my life will begin because they're that now I'm no longer dealing with them." And I think that can get in the way of experiencing the things that are there. And you're right, things can get worse. Things can get worse. So, being able to, in whatever moment we're in, adapt for what it is that we have. And so sometimes the adaptation that we need to do, the radical adaptation applies to when we are out and we are safe and learning to enjoy our lives and trust the safety of a situation that might be more safe now. And it applies to adapting to a situation where we are not able to get fully away from someone. Ooh,
Yeah.
yeah, you and me, we're gonna keep thinking about this.
Yeah.
Radical adaptation. That's what we're
Yeah.
looking
And I
for
think,
in the context of abuse.
yeah, and I think you'll have good days and bad days, right? So like there are some
Mhm.
days where you may not be as built to find ways around it and you may succumb to the rumination and all of the
Mhm,
um,
mhm.
and you need to give yourself grace around that because it is
Yes.
it's hard. And I do think that healing is not linear. It's almost like two steps forward, three steps back, six steps forward, one
Yes.
step back. Like
Yes.
it's this jagged fuckery
Mhm.
of like, I'm okay today, and then, here comes another issue, and then everything
Yes.
becomes resurrected. So you need to really identify that part of it, I don't think
Mhm.
you can get away from. I feel one of the things too that I think is really interesting, and people will go no contact, and that's important. And then they'll say, I don't want to look at him on social media, or I don't want to
Mhm.
know anything. I don't want to do the thing. I don't know. As part of me wonders about those perspectives because there's something about exposure therapy where you can kind of like sometimes microdose
Mm.
like an understanding of they've replaced you with a new supply, this kind of stuff. And I
Mm,
don't have an objection to like managing that versus coming to learn that there's a new supply via something creeps up in your social media or something comes up and somebody texts you, oh, I heard this. And that feels even scarier. That can feel like a nuclear fallout. So I feel like
mhm.
I think there's this misnomer societally, like, why are you still hung up on this? Are you still, this
Yes.
kind of shit feels like very victim blamey. And like, if I
Mhm.
process this by understanding and being ahead of him because I want to see, like, is he in my neighborhood or I'm afraid
Yes.
of this, or I want to know, where his head is because I need to protect myself. Or there's
Mhm.
also this added element of like microdosing and like using exposure therapy to see, like it doesn't become as scary. You become calloused really to sort of this
Mm.
this reality, I think. So there's different schools of thought on that one. What are your thoughts on that?
Like, should you or shouldn't you be aware of your abuser after you leave?
Yeah,
That's
I
the
think,
question?
well, I think also it's in context around societally, people will shame victims. Like,
Oh.
why haven't you moved on? Why are you looking at that? That's not going to do anything for you. I don't know. I have a
Well, obviously, I just shared 20 years. I've been out for 20-ish years, and in my nervous system, I still know that this person is dangerous and
different.
that when given a chance, they would bring harm to me. And I don't necessarily mean physically. I actually don't think I'm in that situation, but professionally or socially in some way. I just know that. And so I think I very much lean to the fact that our abusers train us to know them inside and out. And so if you've been away for a while, but you have an instinct that you need to check in and figure out what's going on, or it's coming up for you again, I don't think it's because you're not over it. I think it's because you are instinctively right that you need to protect yourself.
Yeah.
That's my own experience, and that's been my experience with all of my clients over the last
Yeah.
almost 20 years now.
I think people need to they need to step away from some of these cliche things that society gives us. Like, don't talk
Mhm.
about politics or religion because that's,
Right.
those frameworks and those structures are designed to keep you stupefied and not really
Yes.
engaging. And I think similarly, this feels adjacent. People will do that. They'll be like, "Oh, what are you doing?" It's like, "Well, I'm doing what I need to do, which is maybe I need to be exposed to this because I
Mhm.
feel like it's less scary."
Mhm.
They do that versus this
Yeah.
thing pops up and then there's this like episode, you know what I mean? So I think
Mhm.
I think about those things too. I think about, how people victim blame and how people
Oh my gosh, yes.
do stuff like that. So I'm very sensitive to stuff like that. And so I'll pause and I'll say, well, hold on a second. Because for me, I watched this person on television
Mhm. Oh my
and
gosh.
it was, in some ways it was a blessing. So people were like, how do you deal with that? And I'm like, it's very, very helpful, quite honestly, because
Mm.
I see the copy and paste. I see the playbook playing out like
Mm.
literally like the exact same things that I endured. And so it was very validating in some ways. So I think there's also pieces of
Mhm.
that, and again, I just don't want anyone to feel shame around that because people will say, I know I'm not supposed to do this or something. And who said?
I don't know. Well,
Right.
and so to me, there's so many different situations that people are in, and the voice in your head that says, I shouldn't, I shouldn't, I shouldn't, whose voice is that? That's probably
Right.
connected to your abuser, right? And so
Right.
I think being able to go, well, tell me more. Like, why shouldn't you? Why? Because I don't know. I guess I just shouldn't. Well, that's not a good reason why.
Right.
Let's imagine for a minute there's a good reason to do this. What is it? And what you usually find under that is like, well, one time when this was happening, blah, 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 blah. And so and you're like, well, that makes a lot of sense. So it seems like this is a good idea for you. And let's see what happens. But trusting yourself, it's not about whether someone else, some expert or some, community member thinks what you're doing this the right way. Like your body is wise. It knows what it's
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah.
Listen closely.
Yeah, and I think, even it could just be societally like we're fed like all of these things, but you're right. I think I remember being in the relationship and hearing whispers of like, hide. My son is 27, so we have actual pictures. He's ancient, so like there's actual photographs. I know this is a weird thing for anybody listening. Like
No.
that's what I have, and I have bins of these pictures. And there were whispers of like, hide the pictures. And I ended up doing that. I listened to my gut. I listened to that voice.
Wow.
I listened to the intuition. Had I not, who knows if they were going to end up in the fire pit, stuff like this. But those were the
Oh,
things that I really cherished. And I was wise enough to listen to those things. And as a matter of fact, the
yeah.
night that I fled, again, I listened to myself. So for anybody listening, if you're hearing whispers in any way, certainly, collaborate with people you trust. But I think by and large, your intuition is such a great and tremendous tool.
Yes. And we're such therapists together. We're like, and let's nuance this. And here's another way to look at that. And you aren't always going to have an intuition on an abuser. So,
Right,
like, your body won't always say hide the
right,
pictures
right.
because your abuser will pop out with that idea out of nowhere, and you will have never considered that they would do that, and then they do. So I think don't blame yourself for not having intuition if something happened you didn't ever see coming. And especially in the here and now, as you're doing this work, as you're clear that you were with someone who was abusive, this listening process is going to be more clear for you. And I would say anything in your body that says I don't feel safe, I want to feel protected around this person who has legitimately harmed me in the past, that is a listen to it full stop.
Yeah,
Is it an exaggeration potentially of what they might do? Yeah, maybe. Doesn't matter. Like,
yeah,
if you feel like you need to be protected, protect yourself. And if someone else in your life is like, you're overreacting, you're being dramatic, okay. The consequence for me is that you think I'm dramatic if I do this. The consequence for me if I don't do this and I'm not wrong is much bigger. And so I'm going to choose the consequence of you thinking I'm dramatic over
right, right.
me being harmed in a serious way by this person who has proven themselves to be harmful.
Yep. So before we kind of wrap up today, I do want to touch a little bit on the important work that you're doing with children specifically, because people
Yes.
are constantly asking me
Yeah.
about, and we touched on attachment. So if you can kind of encompass that a little bit, but people are always asking me about how they can, help their children go through some of these experiences. And I think that is extremely valuable.
Yeah.
So, what are you working on? And tell us a little bit about the kid stuff.
So my work is about helping parents become emotionally reliable for kids. What I will say about the context of co-parenting or having, left and gotten away from an abusive parent who, the child had a relationship with, was exposed to. This could be like a 7-hour conversation
Right.
because there's a lot of complexities around it. But in general, I would say if your abuser is a parent of one of your children and is still in their lives, and you are aware that that child is experiencing, the same narcissistic stuff in a different, form, it is okay to say to your child, I can see how it feels uncomfortable for you when you have to go over there, or I can see how it feels. I see it. And I know that there's like the court pieces of this, of like watching out that you don't say anything that could be used as you're alienating the child. So this is, again, it gets messy. But you can acknowledge with a child, like, I saw this on your face. And so you aren't saying your parent is abusive, because I don't know that you
Right.
can say that. If you
No.
feel like you can say that,
Right.
I do think there are situations, if you were physically assaulted by the person you were with and you left and they've lost custody and that is the true story of what happened, you can say, like, why don't we have, I'm going to use typical gender in this dialogue because it is what is the most common, but it might be, why did daddy go away? Why isn't daddy here anymore? And you can say, daddy made some really scary bad choices and he hurt me and he was unsafe and he made threats to hurt me and he was dangerous around you. And why did daddy do that? And I don't know. It's not something that I can answer for him. Maybe someday you will have a conversation with him down the road. I'm not sure if you will or you won't. For now, the courts have decided that he's not safe enough to be around us. So you can be honest about that. The key is that you don't want to ask your child to validate you or be your witness. So you want to be witnessed and validated by therapists and friends and family members and other people in your world so that when you're telling that story to your child, you aren't also going, "Do you believe me?" That's not good. It is, "Here is my story, here is my truth." And it also isn't defacing or dehumanizing, because here's the truth. You were talking about this disturbing reality that human beings can be brutal and violent and hurtful. It's a human characteristic. It's in human beings. And I think all of us in the right situation, actually, I should say in the wrong situation, can end up with those qualities. Whether that's the genetics that are there, plus the environment, the social relational environment, plus a traumatic cultural element, who knows what all the things are, but it's human, it's happening in human beings. So we don't wanna dehumanify, I made that word up. The other parent, but we can be truthful about it in that situation. Now, if you really are like, "I can't say a peep because this person is so
Right.
abusive and they will find a way to use that against me in court and try and get my kids away from me," then you're doing the work of teaching your kids how to trust what they feel.
Yeah.
And that is precious work because as they get older, they will be like, "I just don't feel good at his house." And you're like, "I hear you. Do you want what here are some different options and things that we can do. One option is I can say, blah, 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 blah."
Yeah, and I think that circles right back to that secure attachment because in that moment when you're highlighting to this child all of this, scary stuff, you're really also saying, you're safe with me. You're letting them know, like, I'm
Yes.
here, you're safe regardless.
Yes. Yes.
And you're connecting with them and you'll let them say the things they need to say or grieve or manage that. But I do think that that really is important for them to feel safe because what happens too is that children will blame themselves. It's sort of like,
Yeah.
child psychology 101. They'll blame
Yes.
themselves. So you want to let them know it has nothing to do with them.
Yes. Yes.
You want to let them know that they're safe, as I mentioned. And I think, to the extent that you can give them truth, I do personally believe that is
Mhm.
the best thing because oftentimes if you don't, you could be spoon feeding the narcissist or the toxic parent to them because if you validate that behavior,
Yeah.
then, life is long and sometimes these fools will come back around a few years later and try to swoop in and groom. And
Mhm.
if you don't tell them the truth, they could be gaslit into, all kinds of different things. So I'm a big fan of to the extent that you can age appropriately share, like, there is no Santa Claus in this scenario it
Yes.
helps. And that ultimately, if you don't do that, they end up in our sessions and they're like, why didn't anybody tell me, you know,
Mm.
this was too.
Mhm.
So there's this thing where I think people are well intentioned and they're kind of like, I want a co-parent and I want this person to be healthy. And I want be really careful with that because, sometimes there's more damage done.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the piece where you working on becoming emotionally sturdy in yourself. And, like there's chapters in my book on like how to deal with feeling anxious, how to deal with feeling angry, how to deal with feeling regret, how to deal with feeling rejected by your kid, how to deal with a perfectionism habit, a people pleasing habit, a control habit. Like all of those things are really ultimately about learning how to be regulated in your body. And when you can do that, your kids will feel a quality of your availability that a narcissistic person can never give them. A narcissistic person can charm them, can bribe them, can seduce them, so to speak. I don't necessarily mean sexually, but seduce them in terms of relational pieces.
Sure.
But they can't give them true emotional availability because they exist in a one brain system. The narcissist's brain says, "I am the only one in the room. We will all be happy as long as everyone's happy with me and thinks I'm
Mm.
great and grand." And so that's not secure attachment. And no matter how many presents a narcissist buys your kids, there is nothing more valuable than the gift of an authentic connection with you. So
Mm.
that I think is the hope of the, survivor parent is my this person can take away a lot of things from me. What they cannot take away is my ability to have a two brain relationship with my children and their inability to do that.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, so as we're kind of wrapping up today, I want you to share this amazing thing that you've created that came out yesterday, this book of yours, and also, where people can find you and other things you're working on and all of that, important stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so the book is called How to Deal with Your Fill in the Blank so that your kids don't have to, an encyclopedia for ditching your emotional baggage. It's really just like it's a love letter from me and all my years of being a therapist of like here's what you can do to cope with feelings, here's what they are, and here's how you can break some bad habits that might be getting in between you and your kids. It's available wherever you buy books, and you can find me running my mouth on the internet under the name at Attachment Nerd on primarily Instagram and Facebook. And there's a little bit of YouTube and a little bit of TikTok here and there, but not much. And on my website, attachmentnerd.com. And if you're like, I have no idea how to do this like parent-child piece, I have a secure parent program there. And because I know that financial abuse is often a huge part of relationships. If you can't afford the program, I don't care. There's a pay what you can option. I want you to be able to get that information. There's like, support groups. We call them honesty hours, where people can come in and talk about the parenting piece. So it's not about co-parenting with a narcissist. This is how to be a secure attachment figure for your kids. So
I love this.
yay.
You're gonna find me in this group, just so you know. I feel like it's just such important work. I think it's like a warm hug in a world that can be really, really scary. So if you're listening, this is important stuff. I mean, getting securely attached is like the chef's kiss of all things. I mean, really,
I mean, obviously, I believe that.
yeah,
Yes.
well, it really is sort of like where the rubber meets the road. Like not a lot of people really understand what this means and how
Mm-hmm.
important it is. And
Mm-hmm.
so many people ask me about how to get there. And so, yeah, I seriously will be engaging.
Yay! That would
But
make me so happy.
thank you so much for being here with us today. This is really awesome work you're doing, and I really just appreciate it more than you know.
I loved having you. Thank you for being here.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank
I
you.
loved having you. Hold on, let me say that again. I loved being here. Thank
Yes.
you for having me.
Thank you for being with us today. Be well. Thank you for joining us today on Narcissistic Abuse with Vanessa Reiser. If this episode resonated with you, or if you recognize any of these patterns in your own life or someone you care about, know that you are not alone and healing is possible. If you found value in this conversation, please take a moment to like, subscribe, share, and leave a review. It helps us reach more survivors who need to hear these messages. For exclusive bonus content, deeper discussions with Dave and me, and ways to support the show, join us on Patreon or follow along on Instagram or YouTube at Vanessa Reiser LCSW. Until next time, keep choosing yourself, setting boundaries, and walking toward the light. And remember, healing is a radical rebellion, and your peace is the revolution. Take care, and I'll see you in the next episode.